I think it's safe to say that at first glance, obedience looks to be the least appealing of our 7 monastic steps. It's possible to dress the others up as improving, even attractive accessories for our modern lives, but obedience really does seem to have come straight out of the Dark Ages. From Henry David Thoreau to Albert Einstein to Terry Pratchett, modern freethinkers from across the world see obedience as an instrument for evil. For these writers, the word has sinister connotations, as if it were only ever a tool with which the powerful and manipulative can oppress and coerce. And it's true that millions of people have abused obedience in this way. To be clear then, obedience that is demanded is no obedience at all. It's subjugation, and that's sinful and wrong. However, what I want to talk about is obedience as a gift of freedom, not a fetter. Obedience is not the subjection of oneself to exploitation or coercion, or a blind rejection of the critical faculties. Rather than being taken by force and denying you agency, true obedience is freely given out of a choice which is grounded in being faithful to who you are. I would like to suggest that in choosing obedience, we're being true to ourselves, faithful to others, and to God who created us. I think this is what D.H. Lawrence is getting at when he wrote, "Men are free when they are obeying some deep, inward voice of religious belief, obeying from within. They are free when they belong to a living, organic, believing community, active in fulfilling some unfulfilled, perhaps unrealized purpose, not when they're escaping to some wild west. The most unfree souls go west and shout of freedom." Here is our delicious paradox. It's in obedience that we find true freedom. You might think that freedom means not having to obey or anything or anyone, but as Lawrence suggests, that path leads to a wilderness. We will always find ourselves having to be obedient to one thing or another. The difference between obedience as a gift or curse is choice. Most of our actions can be reduced to a cause and the choice to obey it or not. If you feel hungry, you may choose to obey the urge to have a biscuit, or you may choose to obey the voice which tells you to wait for lunch. Your supervisor or boss will ask you to submit your work by a particular point. When you work to that deadline, you're choosing to obey them. It may not feel like you have much of a choice, but you do, and each decision which you follow is a freely chosen act of obedience. What you've chosen wasn't a foregone conclusion, it's something you own, an independent step towards becoming your true self. Fundamentally, obedience consists of discovering what you most truly and deeply are, or better, what you have it in you to become, and being loyal to that insight that you've received, which requires hard graft and dedication. If I have a vocation to be a scientist or a writer, a musician, a lawyer, politician, artist, or economist, I have to obey that vocation. And that means dedicating my time and assets to pursuing it. If instead I spend all my time watching Netflix, then my failure is one of obedience to my true self. Equally, if I spend all of my time in a lab or a library and never see anybody or do anything, I'm being disobedient to who I am, because I'm also a social creature. True obedience isn't a denial of who I am, but a pursuit of that true self. It frees me to be who I truly am. It frees me from being nothing. The discipline of obedience is the path to substance and growth. Much like brushing your teeth or eating greens, obedience isn't fun or glamorous, but just as those things are necessary for physical growth and maintenance, obedience is necessary for inner growth and maintenance. When we listen to our inner voice and we are obedient to it, we step away from the selfish whims and become who we're truly meant to be. It's how we step into a space where we can listen more clearly to the needs of others. The rule of St. Benedict, our guide in these 7 monastic steps, has this to say about obedience. The excellent virtue of obedience is to be shown by all, not only to the abbot, but to the brethren, who shall also mutually obey one another, knowing that by this path of obedience they shall go to God. Let monks therefore practice this out of love for one another. Let them contend with one another in obedience. Let no one follow what he thinks most profitable to himself, but rather what is best for another. For Benedict, and for those who follow his rule, to obey is to submit to one another in mutual love. This is the heart of obedience, love. To obey in this interpersonal way requires great inner freedom, the ability to judge what you desire and what the other person desires, and then to freely choose to set aside your desires for the sake of the other. What Benedict is describing is the exercise of conscience rather than simply following one's feelings. Conscience is the inner voice which takes consideration of the other, whereas feelings are concerned with the self. We can choose to obey either voice. Obeying others is something that's much easier when we are already obeying ourselves, because then obedience becomes a generous exercise of our autonomy. We can take the current rules of social distancing as an example. I may want to go to the pub, but I have to weigh my desires against the desires and needs of others. Should someone's life be put at risk because I want to have a pint? If I choose to go out and socialise with friends and then make contact with a vulnerable person in a supermarket, I've willingly chosen my own happiness over theirs. Obedience here entails a sacrifice, but it's one which we should be willing to make if we're truly valuing ourselves and other people. To be able to obey others is to find freedom from the tyranny of self-absorption and self-gratification, which prevents us from treating other people as human beings. In the end, selfishness will always detract from our own humanity. This is where we remember that at the heart of obedience is love. It's out of love that we submit to one another. It's only in love that we are free. On the other hand, self-centeredness is a path which leads to true isolation and misery. In obeying our true selves, we're ultimately obeying the voice of God, who has given us each of our days and our own unique gifts. As the psalmist writes, O Lord, thou hast searched me and known me. Thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect. And in thy book were all thy members written. There's no dichotomy between obedience to God and our true selves. God has given you the incredible, unique gift which only you possess. Obedience means being faithful to that calling. What the world needs is your own peculiar, God-given uniqueness. So listen to that true inner voice and be obedient to it. It's in obedience that we are led to humility, more of which on Thursday.